see. But in 1997, I was teaching at Cave Canem. There we are. Can everyone see?
Yeah.
And so Cave Canem is the first retreat for African American poets in the history of American literature. And so I was one of the first faculty. The co-founders are Toy Derricott and Cornelius Eady. So in 1997, they called me and Elizabeth Alexander in to be the first faculty. And one of the things I did was to create this form to give some structure to the workshop. And in 1997, American popular music, around that time, 96, 97, Tupac was killed, and Biggie Smalls was killed. And rap had, or hip-hop, not rap, but hip-hop, had reached a certain point in its evolution. And that was before your time. It's prehistory to you. But to my students who were about your age at that time, roughly, it was the time of their music. You know, they're now in their 40s, they're 50. And so my concern in creating this forum was to bring American popular music into some kind of useful format in the creation of the structure of this thing I call the bop. So the bop was, let me read this to you. It's called Rambling, and that's taken from a Robert Johnson song, Robert Johnson, the blues artist, the title. And it was, the poem is set in Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, and that's near, it's in Lewisburg, of course, and it's near several universities there. In Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. In general population, census is consensus. Ain't nowhere to run to in these walls like a mind. We visitors stand in a yellow circle so the tower can frisk us with light. Finger the barrels on thirsty rifles. I got rambling on my mind. In general population, madness runs swift through the river changing in hearts, men tacked in their chairs, resigned to hope we weave into air, talking this and talking that. And one brother asks, tell us how to get these things they got, these houses, these cars. We want the real revolution, things. I got rambling on my mind. In the yellow circle, the night stops like a boy's shot running from a Ruger 9mm, carrying 44 Magnum shells, a sister crying in the glass booth to love's law, to violence of backs bent over to the raw libido of men, cracking, crack. I got rambling on my mind. So, the structure of the poem is around the golden mean. Are you familiar with the golden mean? The golden mean is a composition principle that was used in the Renaissance, still used today. So if you watch a film, if it's the frame of a film, it's a 1/3, 2/3 relationship. So 1/3 this way, 1/3 that way helps you position the focus of the image. All right, so the principle here is pretty much is the same. So there are three, it's on the principle of three. There are three main stanzas and three refrains. It's the golden mean principle. The first stanza has 6 lines. The refrain can have anywhere from 1 to 3 lines. I liked 1 line. This is sort of like the very first bop. And then the 8 lines, and then the refrain again, and then 6 lines of close. And so it goes in a syllogistic kind of way. The first stanza introduces the subject. The second stanza is where you work through it. In a sonnet, you would call that the volta. The volta happens in the second stanza. And then the third stanza is a kind of resolution. And the refrain is taken from a popular song. The very first thing that you have to do is to have a refrain that will not cause you to be sued by ASCAP, right? So this song is actually, it's pretty safe. It's an old song. The copyright issues were not a problem. But the very first thing I would say would be to find a song that you like and then derive a refrain without using beyond the limitations. You cannot copy verbatim a song by, say, Kendrick Lamar. Or you can't take a Kendrick Lamar line. You can be inspired by it, but you have to rework it so that it's legally it's your own. And you use that in conjunction with the subject that you choose. I was at Bucknell University as a poet in residence when I did this. This was around 1997. We went to the penitentiary to teach poetry. And I was trying to capture the sense of confinement, as well as the issues that go on in prison culture. And then the fact that some of these men were still obsessed with what got them into the prison. So they didn't want to study poetry. They wanted to learn the final art of burglary. And I'm like, you cannot do this. That's why you're here, And so I was struggling with the question of what is actually involved in criminality as opposed to being a revolutionary. That was one thing on my mind. And then there was also how to use vernacular English with standard, quote unquote, standard English. Because for me, that's a cultural, political issue, right? And so I found ways to intersperse the vernacular with the standard English throughout the poem. You can do whatever you like. Another, in the last stanza, another issue at the beginning was around this time, the state police, I believe, in either New Jersey or Maryland, were using different sidearms. They were carrying 9mm, but the 9mm had a capacity for 44 Magnum shells. And a 44 Magnum shell is very destructive. And so that was a real issue for me to put that, the violence of a law enforcement. So all of that is, I hope, working in that poem. And so the bop was, it started in the workshop. And then people that I taught began to teach it outside of Cave Canem. And it was taken to Japan in one instance. So it became something much larger than a workshop exercise. And so the bop has 3 stanzas. It has a refrain. It's around the idea of popular music, and it allows different levels of English to be used. And after a few years with the bop, I began to explain to people that it doesn't have to be precisely, it doesn't have to be about anger. It can be about celebration. It can be about love, or whatever. And somehow or another, people are beginning to think about the bop as outrage. It can be that, but it doesn't have to be that. So, if you're interested in writing a bop, this is at the Academy of American Poets. It's up on their website. This is the one that I wrote right at the time of the workshop at Cave Canem, and it gives you the original format of the bop. I named it the bop because in East Baltimore, when I was a youngster, when I was coming along, as we say, a man especially had a certain way of walking, and we call it a bop. A person was known by the way that they walked. And in Melbourne, in our time, there was more walking around in the neighborhood. Now it might be a little bit more, it's a little precarious. But you declared your presence by the way you walked in the neighborhood, and that's why I called it the bop.
Your bop was your swagger, and everybody had a different way of strolling, and you might say he got a cool bop, the way it was walking. So a bop is an individual. You all have a different bop. You all have your individual way of expressing yourself in the way you move.